I'm Dom Griffin, I'm a film critic, and this is a review of Dune Part 2. I want to preface this video by acknowledging that there are a lot of fascinating and layered elements of the Dune mythology that I don't feel I can thoroughly explore because I haven't read the book since I was like 12. I went into this screening having just rewatched Dune the night before, and on my ride to the theater, my mind was spinning with questions about how they would improve upon Part 1, how they would translate some of the stranger elements of the novel, and whether or not the film would be able to adequately respond to criticisms of its minimal representation for men and performers. But I have to be honest that the act of seeing the movie kind of superkicked many of those concerns and thoughts directly out of my head. I was too awed to adequately think peace. I plan to follow up with more detail after I see the film again, so I'll be chatting about the movie with spoilers and more minutiae on my podcast, Your Fave Film Critic, upon its actual release. The pod is out every Friday, so keep your eyes peeled and ears open, I guess. The TLDR is, I think the movie rocks. I think it's the best thing Denis Villeneuve has ever done, and I think it's not likely to be topped this year in terms of pure spectacle and entertainment. If you were one of the people who thought Part 1's drab, brutalist, meditative, prolonged Act 1 was too leaden, then you will likely see this as a massive improvement. For prior reading on my Dune feelings, I'd direct you to a video I made back in 2020 where I talked about the internet overreaction to the early set photos and how difficult I felt it would be to make a faithful Dune adaptation that would also be palatable and entertaining to the masses. I think Dune Part 2 answers that pretty effectively, being one of the hardest hitting big screen experiences I have had in ages. I saw it on an AMC Dolby screen, my Apple Watch would not stop giving me high decibel warnings, and the seats shook and rumbled like I had paid for Regal 4DX. Nearly every sequence was superlative, the battle scenes are engrossing, it's such effective and invigorating pop art, purely from an audiovisual perspective. This is very much a hook it into my fucking veins type of endeavor. The cast is all great, Chalamet and Zendaya are even better than the first time out, Florence Pugh is a delight, and somehow, Austin Butler finally learned to stop talking like Elvis, and now instead sounds like Stellan Skarsgård's secret ninth child.
May thy knife chip and shatter.
The movie is surprisingly funny. I feel like Villeneuve gets the same sort of critique Nolan does as being self-serious, but there's a fair amount of levity in this, especially from Bardem, who was a riot. In some ways, I feel like they made this movie the most entertaining it could possibly be, given how complex the source material is. But I'm still not sure if they fixed my main complaint with Part 1. From my review of that film for Looper.com, Villeneuve's Dune is a stunning achievement in terms of awe, in terms of spectacle, and in its standing as one of the few new films that can genuinely lay claim to needing to be seen on as big a screen as possible. But what it peacocks in visual splendor, it lacks in depth in a way that feels hard to excuse, especially for a film with a 2.5-hour runtime. Ultimately, Dune is ambitious to a fault. For what use does the marketplace of ideas have in a Star Wars for adults when the vast majority of adults these days seem to prefer the comforting, weaponized nostalgia of endless Star Wars ephemera? Having rewatched the movie last night, I feel like that was a bit harsh of me. Last night was my third rewatch of the film and likely my favorite, though I maintain it does drag a bit. My real issue with Part 1 was this. But the nature of the film's structure isn't likely to inspire the hunger for more the filmmakers here seem to think it will. Best case scenario, Dune does well domestically and a sequel gets greenlit in the next few weeks, one which won't reach audiences for another few years at the earliest. And not for a sequel, or because they loved this world so much they just have to have seconds, but to literally get the rest of the story they paid to see. In an attempt to counter-program against the marvels of the world, for whom a sprawling shared universe can protract forever off the strength of dogmatic fervor, Villeneuve and company have made Dune the Kickstarter project of tentpole motion pictures. No matter how well made it objectively is, or how beloved the story, this, in the end, is an expensive proof of concept asking audiences to crowdfund interest in finishing the damn thing. That's a harder sell than they think. Well, it's been 2.5 years since I wrote those words, and I was wrong. They did make Part 2. It exists. I liked it a lot. I think it's pretty rad. But I'm not sure how good an experience watching both halves together will eventually be, because in some ways, this feels less like a continuation of Part 1 than a whole new movie unto itself, which is a strange thing to say about a 2-part adaptation of one book. Additionally, that lingering feeling of a story unfinished from Part 1 remains, because it's clear Villeneuve's plan is to make this a trilogy by adapting Dune Messiah next. Turning the second half of Dune into Empire Strikes Back is a choice, and I'm not entirely certain it was the right one. I felt like in some ways they just kicked the can further down the road the way they did last time. I know they're going to make Dune Messiah. I feel like this is going to considerably outperform Part 1. But it brings me to my main issue with the movie that, again, didn't impact my personal enjoyment, but may grate on me more on repeat viewings. I think the key issue with Dune Part 2 is that it's clear Villeneuve has put forth considerable effort to mitigate potential issues with the novel's white savior material. But in the end, he has made a movie that is entirely too rad and too dudes rock for those efforts to matter or be particularly effective. Let me explain. For this video, I was searching for a specific quote I'd seen on TikTok last month from Villeneuve about how the biggest departure from the novel was his decision to frame Zendaya's Chani as the point of view character for the film's second half. This brought me to the sad reality that most of the people reporting about this creative decision were anti-woke pop culture commentators, petrified Villeneuve was going to sideline the white Paul Atreides for the not white Chani. I don't know if they thought he meant Chani was going to become the chosen one instead, or that they were going to kill Paul off to do that, but people were real mad. One of them even used a curse phrase I hope to never see again. Cuck neo-feminism. We're just throwing words together now, aren't we? But that's not really what he meant. It's clear that Dune Messiah is coming next, and it's primarily going to recontextualize Paul's journey up to this point. So for this film, it feels like they want to augment the presentation of Paul's ascendance to further foreshadow where it will go in the next outing. The way Villeneuve chooses to do this is for us to watch Paul change from Chani's eyes rather than from his own POV. This feels like a dumb comparison, but the interplay between Chani, Paul, and Javier Bardem's Stilgar feels a lot more like the interactions between Trinity, Neo, and Morpheus in The Matrix Reloaded. Like, to be honest, all the stuff with the Fremen has a little bit of Zion in it, minus the big techno orgy. And of course, allowing for the obvious reality that Dune came first and its DNA is at least partially embedded in most major sci-fi that came after it. And honestly, all that stuff is maybe my favorite stuff in the movie. But for all the work put into framing Paul becoming the Kwisatz Haderach as this cursed, portentous event, goes out the window when he finally does it. And the movie just becomes this hard-body, heat-rock depiction of undeniable coolness. This isn't me saying I wasn't smart enough to see what was really at play underneath the surface, just that from the moment Paul decides to lead the fundamentalist onward, everything he does and everything that happens is entirely too badass to believably be the nuanced and layered thing I think they wanted it to be. When the action is this deft and the set pieces hit this hard, what the movie is doing to the viewer on a thrill ride level ends up superseding any of the deeper themes at play. I want to believe that repeat viewings will prove that I just got too swept up in the surround sound and Greg Fraser's cinematography and Hans Zimmer's cartoonishly thunderous score. And with time and distance, I'll develop deeper, more lasting feelings about the film. But I also know we're only 2 weeks out from fans making TikToks out of HD cam bootlegs of the movie, with Paul Atreides moving through a crowd of Fremen set to Cardi's verse from Kanye West and Ty Dolla $ign's hit Carnival, and not a single person in the comments is going to give even a fraction of a fuck about Butlerian Jihad. I'm still unsure if it's okay to be mad at a movie for kicking too much ass, you know? So, yeah, I dug Dune Part 2 a lot. I think most will enjoy it too, but I can't wait to see it again and again to pick it apart further, something I didn't really feel at the end of Part 1. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you loved it, please subscribe, hit the little bell icon to get notifications for whenever I drop new content, and if you have any thoughts, please leave them in the comments below. If you have any Dune-related or unrelated questions, you can hit me here, or on Twitter, or Instagram, or email me at armchairauteur@gmail.com, and I'll happily answer them on the podcast this week. Hope you're all doing well, staying safe, and being good to yourselves, and each other. See you in the next one.